Today I'm going to stir up some controversy, I'm afraid. And as we know, diet is controversial anyway. You've got keto diet and the vegan diet and the carnivore diet, and everybody has their opinions. So let's deep dive my thoughts on the carnivore diet. Basically, what is the carnivore diet to start with? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a dietary approach that includes only animal products, eliminating all plant foods. So according to a 2021 Harvard study that studied over 2,000 people following a carnivore diet, the majority of them were motivated primarily by health reasons, not just weight loss, but just feeling better. Most carnivore dieters focus on ruminant meats like beef, lamb, bison, poultry and eggs, though some even avoid those, fish and seafood, animal fats, sometimes dairy, strictly avoiding vegetables, grains, fruits, nuts, seeds, all plant-derived foods. A lot of people claim there's an evolutionary argument for this, that our great ancestors were designed to be carnivores and that we basically were meat eaters. And we were, but really we were not. We were omnivores. We ate whatever was available to us, especially in hard times. So I don't think you can make the argument that this is how we were meant to be. I do think there's almost no doubt that for autoimmune conditions, for some people, doing a brief period of carnivore diet just eliminates all those inflammatory things that they might be ingesting. The most compelling anecdotal evidence does come from the autoimmune people. And according to a Harvard study, about 59% of participants cited that autoimmune disorders were the reason that they decided to go to carnivore. And 89% of them actually said that they had some symptomatic improvement with that. When you look at the likely reason for that, we have gotten rid of all the metabolic stress. We've gotten rid of anything that potentially is triggering an inflammatory response. A brief period of using a carnivore diet in people who are trying to recover from autoimmune disorders can be very reasonable. But there is so much more to the story. There is nutritional concerns. A major criticism of the carnivore diet is its potential for nutritional inadequacies. You just shouldn't be eliminating entire food groups. And the carnivore diet just largely eliminates nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains, all of which contain so many vitamins and minerals. So while meat is nutritious, it shouldn't really be the only thing you eat. And a nutritional analysis of the carnivore diet found actually critical nutrient deficiencies, including things like thiamine, folate, vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, potassium, all lacking in some of the people who are strict carnivores. The other thing that concerns me a lot is just this acid-base balance issue. So one of the critiques of eating too much protein is that the kidneys struggle with that. That's not really true. What we do know is that the kidneys do struggle when there's a big acidic load given to them. With a high animal protein diet, we get this high acid overload. And that induces this low-grade metabolic acidosis state. So the kidneys have to make up for that. This acid-base balance occurs and the body has to be able to deal with it. So while this metabolic acidosis is occurring, the kidneys have to work harder to remove that excess acid from the blood. And that's going to stress the kidneys. So for individuals following a carnivore diet, this acid-base balance can potentially lead to calcium loss from bones over time, increased risk of osteoporosis. And so some of the ways you can get around that are doing things like potassium bicarb, but I would advocate that eating vegetables along with your meat is probably the best way to keep that acid-base balance. The other thing that I really don't like is if you're sticking to this diet long-term, you lose what's called metabolic flexibility. This is your body's ability to switch between different fuel sources, primarily between glucose and fat metabolism, depending on its availability, physiologic demands. It's just a fundamental aspect of metabolic health. So in the initial context of the carnivore diet, there's a lot of important considerations. We know that the long-term carnivore diet typically induces ketosis due to its extremely low carbohydrate content. Now, while this can be beneficial for certain conditions, it may not be good long-term. As the body adapts to this, using only ketones or fats as our fuel with very low carbohydrate over a long time, the expression of certain enzymes that are really involved in glucose metabolism is down-regulated. Now, it's okay to do that temporarily, but it's not good to do it long-term because that starts to impair glucose tolerance. And if carbohydrates are ever reintroduced, then they're not tolerated. So while low-carb diets often improve insulin sensitivity, some research suggests that extremely long-term carbohydrate restriction might eventually lead to a form of physiologic insulin resistance, where muscles become temporarily less responsive to insulin. We want to be adaptable. We want to be resilient. We want to be able to use different fuel sources, especially if there's a zombie apocalypse, right? We need to be able to get fuel wherever we can. Where does the science stand on this? There's not really a lot of good scientific rigor about this. There was one 2021 study that looked at, for 6 months, at ketogenic dieters, and they looked at their labs. But interestingly, about half the people fell out of the study before the 6-month period because they did not feel well or did not tolerate the diet. How good a study is that? In the people who did complete it, they did have good labs. Everything looked fine. There was no evidence of significant disorders in them. They didn't look at nutrient profiles, however. They looked at metabolic markers and things like that. And I would advocate that 6 months might be okay. I think doing this for 3 months is probably the better way to go, and then changing off. My final recommendation in conclusion is, like everything else, nothing is all good and nothing is all bad. When we look at the carnivore diet, it can be a useful tool in trying to help people who are dealing with autoimmune conditions. But I think that its long-term use and people who are advocating living that as their lifestyle are going to run into problems over the long term. And the better approach to healthy living is keeping metabolic flexibility, keeping diet variety, keeping healthy meats, healthy vegetables, healthy fruits, seeds, and even some grains, my favorites being things like quinoa and amaranth and buckwheat that actually have some value as well. Now, science is always changing. I always will be watching it if there's some really compelling reason that I change my mind on this. But for now, my approach is a sensible, well-rounded Mediterranean type diet.